Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, March the 23rd, 2021. Sorry about not being here yesterday. Some things came up. I want to start by thanking everyone who contributed to my appeal. I am overwhelmed by your kindness and generosity. Thank you so much, and God bless you. And I'm here in this place for another month, which is great. Well, compared to the alternative, I must say. It's a spring here now in Victoria, and things are heating up across the street in what was formerly Paul's Motor Inn. About every night, pretty much without exception, I am awakened at about 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning by police cars, ambulances coming to the place directly across the street. What was it? Last night, there was a fire of some sort, and I smelled something odd in the hotel room, and I began to panic because, of course, you don't want to be in a hotel room when there's a fire. And I thought, probably across the street. Yep, and it was across the street. Who started it and why? I'm assuming someone started it because that's the kind of place that it is. 2 nights ago, there were 5 cop cars, 3 ambulances, and a fire truck outside. I'm assuming this was a drug overdose or perhaps a series of drug overdoses. As I've mentioned, the federal government of Canada, in its wisdom, while insisting no, it has no intention of legalizing drugs, is now giving away drugs, high-quality drugs such as heroin, to people now. And, of course, Britain tried this experiment in the 1960s. If you registered as a junkie, you got your free government junk. But what the government found out and why they canceled the program was the junkies would shoot up their junk, and then they would go and look for more junk, which of necessity involved theft or robbery to get the money. But a tremendous social experiment is being played out in my city of Victoria. What happens if you put out the word to all of Canada that all homeless people or people who think they might be homeless or want to become homeless or all the junkies, come on down to Victoria. We'll lay on a smorgasbord for you. Hello to Matthew Gubbins, KMG living in Thunderdome. Yes, thank you so much, G.C. Style. And hello to Tricky Who and Pitsky Popcasso 88, Dan and Gamma Yun. So let's talk about the Snyder Cut. I've been seeing this hashtag for months, years. Release the Snyder Cut, and I don't pay all that much attention to that world. And I thought until last week that it was some sort of ironic reference. Well, it turns out it's not an ironic reference at all. In case you haven't been following this, just as there is a Marvel Cinematic Universe, or MCU, there is a DC Comics Cinematic Universe, or DCU, which has been nowhere near as successful as the MCU. So, in 2017, a movie came out called The Justice League, and it was directed by Zack Snyder, who apparently is some sort of auteur, some sort of a cape shit god. And the studio did not like it at all. And I suppose Zack Snyder, the story goes, a child of his died, and he was kind of fed up the whole thing, and he walked away. And so they brought in Josh Whedon of Leaden Whimsy fame. Oh, also a feminist ally. to do tons of reshoots on this and make it funnier, snarkier. The movie was a big bomb, and so there's all this internet furor for release the Snyder Cut, and so Warner Brothers decides that they're going to release the Snyder Cut. They're going to bring back Zack Snyder, and they're going to spend $70 million more than they had already spent on a picture that was a bomb. And so it's playing on HBO Max, and I believe you can get it other places. The first movie cost $300 million to make and grossed around $658 million. So, yeah, lost Warner Brothers a lot of money. I'm trying to think of another example of something like this kind of madness. And I guess there was a part of the Exorcist cinematic universe movie that was made and then abandoned, and then someone else was brought in. Exorcist, the beginning. Yeah, Paul Schrader had made a film called Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, which Morgan Creek did not like. So they brought in hack Rennie Harlan to fix it, and nobody liked it. And so they said to Paul Schrader, how about you go back to what you had done originally? We're not going to give you very much money for this. But no, so they made two versions of the same movie. Schrader's version is pretty good, I must say. I just, if you hire Paul Schrader to make a movie about the supernatural, I would think that you have a pretty good idea of what you're going to get. But no, this is too much like a Paul Schrader movie. Too funny. Too funny. I read comic books when I was a child, and I read the DC comic books and not the Marvel comic books. The idea of superheroes having personal problems never really appealed to me. Plus, I always loved Superman, just like Jerry Seinfeld. I'm told that when I was quite young, when I was informed that Santa Claus wasn't real, I took it well enough. But when I was told that Superman wasn't real, I was distraught. But I grew out of it. I used to get 25 cents allowance, and comic books were 12 cents, so I could get 2 comic books every week and have a penny left over for gum breakers. There's my granddad story for the day. But what? By the age of about 10 or certainly 11, I was finished with comic books, because comic books are for children. Apparently, they're not for children anymore, and they just get bigger and bigger and bigger. When Kubrick's movie 2001 came out in 1968, after the initial preview, he slashed, about 20 minutes from it. So its current running time is 142 minutes, and there are a fair number of people who consider that to be glacial. Barry Lyndon, which I've talked about on Theater Thursday, which came out in 1975, is 187 minutes long. A lot of people find it too slow. I certainly do not. There's a lot going on in that movie. But here's a DC film that came out in 2018 called Aquaman. And it is 143 minutes long. That is to say, it's longer than 2001. What is going on in these movies that you can't dispatch this in 90 to 100 minutes? It's a mystery. It's a mystery to me. So just an enormous amount of controversy about the Snyder cut. and him being jerked around by the studio, supposedly, and Christopher Nolan telling him, no, you can never watch this movie. This is from a Vanity Fair story. It's almost unbelievable, but nothing coming out of Hollywood, particularly now, is unbelievable to me. Initially, says Snyder, Warner Brothers just wanted to release the raw footage on his laptop. I was like, that's a no, that's a hard no. And they're like, but why? You can just put up the rough cut. Snyder didn't trust their motivations. I go, here's why. 3 reasons. 1, you get the internet off your back, which is probably your main reason for wanting to do this. 2, you get to feel vindicated for making things right, I guess, on some level. And then 3, you get a shitty version of the movie that you can point at and go, see, it's not that good anyway. So maybe I was right. I was like, no chance. I would rather just have the Snyder Cut be a mythical unicorn for all time. But now there is a happy ending to this story. And so I guess you're wondering, since I was complaining about long movies, how long is Justice League? It is 242 minutes long. Yeah, that's 2 minutes more than 4 hours long. Well, it better be the greatest story ever told, right? I have not watched the film, and I'm not going to watch the film. I did see the review, which is a little over an hour on Red Letter Media. And, well, that's an hour, out of my life that I'm not going to get back, as they say. But on the other hand, that since this Snyder Cut is such a cultural phenomenon, I felt it my duty to at least acquaint myself with it to that extent. There's a lot of comparison in the Red Letter Media review between the Whedon version and the Snyder version. And a lot of the stuff in the Whedon version is just shocking. Do you consider this to be a joke? And this a joke? And this a joke? Oh, let's make Lois Lane a feminist, a rather unpleasant feminist as well. Oh, okay. And so now we have this battle between Whedon and Snyder. Oh, Josh Whedon, I never liked him anyway. That's what a lot of people are saying now. Oh, yeah, the Snyder version ends, and then there's a 30-minute epilogue. Don't people know how to tell stories anymore? Apparently not. David French, who used to write for National Review, Bronze Star winner, who now writes for something called The Dispatch. Apparently, Jonah Goldberg, maundering on about Babylon 5 or whatever, it wasn't enough for Conservatism Inc. And David A. French has to get into it. He's 52 years old, okay? And he said a few days ago that the greatest thing about America was superhero movies. Now, obviously, there's a fair degree of hyperbole there, deliberate hyperbole, but you know that to a certain extent, he actually believes this. I'm looking at his Twitter feed now. Size E Cup says, what is this Snyder Cut? And is it mandatory? French replies, it's in all likelihood the greatest superhero movie since the Nolan Batman trilogy. And yes, it's mandatory. And he goes on and on and on about this. Quoting Ryan Reynolds. Ryan Reynolds gets to be playing superhero movies because people have lost their minds. Talking about the Green Lantern. I used to buy Green Lantern comics when I was a child. I don't think I remember what it was that he actually did. Also, The Flash. The Flash can run very fast. I can imagine that would be useful in certain circumstances, but again, this stuff is for children. Zack Snyder, if I recall correctly, made a movie called Batman versus Superman. Yeah, in which Superman gets killed. Why would you do that? Of course, he gets brought back because, as they say, no one ever really dies. Oh, Ben Affleck plays Batman. And Batman was always a problem, because he doesn't have any superpowers. And in the reshot stuff, Ben Affleck, that guy has been put through the mill. Okay. David French at the Dispatch. Zack Snyder's Justice League and America's second greatest superhero trilogy. When one reviews the immense and growing pantheon of superhero movies, there's a single question that can separate the good, because, let's face it, all superhero movies are at least a little bit good from the great. Does the director take the premise seriously? If he does, then the movie has a chance to be great. If he doesn't, if he subtly or not so subtly makes it clear that we're on the cinematic equivalent of an amusement park ride, then he's capped out at good. He's made movie cotton candy something that tastes just fine but has no lasting substance. For some time, we've placed superhero movies and television shows in a different mental category from high fantasy. At first glance, stories of elves, dwarves, and magic rings are no less ludicrous than stories of alien super beings or Greek gods. But when you take a premise seriously, build a world with rigor, and connect the story with human experience, you have a chance to make something transcendent. Lord of the Rings achieved transcendence. At its peak, Game of Thrones was arguably the best show on television, ice, zombies, and all. But how many superhero movies have reached those heights? How many have even tried? The short answer is that Christopher Nolan achieved it. His Batman trilogy is so good that it's almost not even perceived as a superhero series. They're just great movies. Full stop. The longer answer is that Zack Snyder tried, and while he didn't reach Nolan's heights, he created something truly distinct, a universe that took its premise seriously and explored the world that superheroes would create. Again, David A. French is 52 years old, and I've yet to see any indication that he has an appreciation of anything that is serious. Now, I suppose, he's a neocon, so he likes this idea of American superheroes, and of course they are American superheroes, going around the world dispensing justice and dispatching monsters with a single punch. That would seem to be the level of their political sophistication. Oh, we've got Sonny Bunch and Major Tom Nichols talking about this. Yes, this is the, in 1968, 2001, A Space Odyssey came out in 2021. The Snyder Cut was released. Kubrick made 2001. I suppose it was a challenge because he thought that there were no good science fiction films that had been made up to that time, that they were simply cheesy. 2001 is a profound, mysterious film about the nature of the universe itself and the infinite terror of space. I watched the reviews, the clips of these Marvel movies and the DC movies. Explosions. You remember when people were excited, like when that gas station was blown up in RoboCop? No. That's not a big enough explosion. You need to level a whole city block, or perhaps a whole city neighborhood, a whole city, a whole country, a whole hemisphere, a whole planet, a whole solar system, a whole universe. Just can't get enough explosions. And of course, since these explosions are all CGI, they don't look real. Let's go to the chat here. Okay, glad to see there's a lot of people here today. Junkie Paradise. So come with me. We'll go and see the Big Rock Candy Mountain. Yes, where cigarettes hang from trees. A 4-hour spandex movie. I can't wait. maybe 4 hours isn't long enough. Maybe how long was Showa? Was that about 10 hours? Say, Hikma Warrior talks about the Colorado killer. I'll be getting to him a little later. Palpicasso 88 says the guys at Half in the Bag liked it. They're really easy to bring over to your side, actually. The rule for this sort of thing is if it doesn't make you want to vomit blood, then it's pretty good. Hello to Gandalf White the Second. Neil Terry says, glad people helped out. Yes, again, thank you so very much. Metal Mike says, I'm pretty much done with comic-based movies. Now, they were joking on Red Letter Media that, well, what about the Solo, a standalone Star Wars movie? And two men were brought in to do it because, they'd made the Lego movie. And apparently this movie was going to be fun. It was going to be a comedy. And, maybe treat the subject matter with a little irony, like Joe Dante did in Gremlins 2. I have no objection to fantasy, to cartoons, even to absurd situations. It helps if these movies make me laugh. And of course, the Marvel Universe is just full of snark, which I'm not a fan of. Let's scroll down, see what else we have. Hans Seiderberg, a film for Germany, was 442 minutes long. Well, I suppose there's a lot in Germany there. William Hicks says, KMG, since you're talking movies, I recently purchased a DVD of Russian Ark. Wonder what you think of that one. Have not yet seen it. Picasso 88 says, I told my 37-year-old cousin that Harry Potter and Disney movies are for children. She flipped out on me. Hello to Professor Paul. Well, again, I've mentioned this many times that, what about Warner Brothers and MGM cartoons? You talk about them. They weren't made for children. They were made for adults. Oh, William Hicks says, was Superman killed or killed? And Ben Affleck's main qualification for the part of Batman is having the right chin. I've only seen one modern Batman movie, and that was Tim Burton's, which I enjoyed. Of course, it helps if you're going to cast two actors and let them be as funny as Jack Palance and Jack Nicholson were in that. HIB Positive Transgender says, Ben, I visited Epstein Island, Affleck. Check out the Ingmar Bergman directs the Flash video on this site. He's the comic relief in this film, is he? Apparently. Wonder Woman. Yeah, of course, I don't watch these movies. First Wonder Woman came out, the one with Gal Gadot in it, and people thought it was good, and then they made another one, and everyone thought it was terrible. And she's in this movie, and she's, mopey? She doesn't know whether she wants to be a superhero anymore. Did you see ULF's critique of your stream literally 5 minutes after it ended, says Chogokin66 to Jonathan Pohl. Okay, so enough about, the heartbreaking true story of the Snyder Cut. It's from Anthony Bresnikan at Vanity Fair. Let's talk about the President of the United States. Things have gotten seriously strange in America. And Joe Biden is the President of the United States, but he seems to be, more mythic than real now. He's a man who lives in a basement, and every so often he is trotted out to blunder into microphones or to trip on airplane stairs. I've seen the video of him coming up the stairs, and you see hubris, okay? He's 78 years old, but he wanted to show how jaunty he still is. So he starts to run up those stairs, which is not a good idea when you're 78 years old or perhaps any other age, because those stairs are pretty steep. And he fell 3 times. And I'm old enough to remember when Jerry Ford was president, and I believe he tripped twice on airplane stairs. And this became the biggest meme in the world, that Jerry Ford was a buffoon. Jerry Ford was actually a high school athlete, and a very high-rated one as well. It was a very interesting story when you consider the circumstances. He was an adopted child who I think met his father once when he was 18 or 19 and resolved never to meet him again because he was a feckless drunk. It's kind of an inspiring story about Jerry Ford, actually. But let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say. Is there some sort of game on in the USA? Have our public affairs ever looked so false and disordered? Is it ever more wondrous that Joe Biden somehow managed to win the Super Tuesday primary, let alone the national election? Yes, I'll just break in to say that Joe Biden finished 5th in the New Hampshire primary. 5th. This is the kind of result which typically means the candidate announces the next day that he's suspending his campaign and then out of the race. 5th in the New Hampshire primary. Wow, that's quite an amazing comeback Joe Biden made there. Nothing suspicious about it at all. Kunstler continues, the country has gotten exactly what it saw all through the autumn of 2020, the empty shell of a broken politician. Back in October, old Joe, hiding in his basement, was played as a bad joke in a nervous zeitgeist. Nothing to see, according to the captive news media. Wasn't that exactly it, though? Nothing to see and nobody home, the essence of our now President Joe Biden. How on earth did this happen? My own theory, it was a strange byproduct of the political establishment fumbling to cover up its crimes, an endeavor so transparently inept that the rest of the world goggles at us in nauseated incredulity. Watching our leadership flounder, our institutions fail, our economy vaporize, and our power dissolve like some dying blob in an epic horror movie. I have to say that I think that's a little unfair, because one could say similar things about Canada, Britain, and France, to give just 3 other examples. Even our most devoted adversary, North Korea, marvels out loud at the spectacle of American collapse. They joke about it, but it must make them awfully uncomfortable to realize that the USA runs under a shadow government and runs so ineptly. Who or what is this shadow government, Kunstler asks? I'd say it amounts to a small group around former President Obama and former Attorney General Eric Holder, plus a coterie of intel community figures led by John Brennan, all awkwardly funneling instructions through Susan Rice to the hacks in the White House who form a flimsy cocoon around the barely pulsating organism within Biden. I will boldly suggest that this cabal is actually controlling the executive branch of the government and doing it with stunning incompetence. If it sounds like a conspiracy, that's probably because it is a conspiracy. What were those crimes of theirs? Maybe the actions they took the past 4 years to cover up their intense and sedulous ongoing corruption of previous years, especially all the channels of money grubbing that run from Wall Street and K Street through the halls of Congress, and secondarily, their political agenda to destroy by any means necessary the opposition vested in a weak and ineffectual party at odds with its own elected leader, Trump. The means turned out to be one dishonest exploit after another aimed at disabling and eliminating the uncontrollable Trump. Russiagate, the Flynn case, the Mueller investigation, Ukraine phone call, impeachment number 1, coronavirus hysteria, identity politics hysteria, including the 2020 summer riots, and the social media companies' censorship and cancellation initiative. And then there's more that he adds, which I can't say because this is YouTube. I think it worked this way. John Brennan's CIA enlisted a desperately failing news media in an ideological campaign to propagandize and lie to the American public based on Brennan's own past ideological disposition as a self-declared communist. Yes, he actually said that about himself, though his Marxism and that of his allies was a mashup of foolish utopianisms used to cover a sheer wish to annihilate any opposition, frustrating their will to power. I'd venture to suppose that Brennan continued to influence and even direct these agate-prop operations long after he was removed as CIA director, even as he fought off accusations for his role in helping Hillary Clinton gin up Russiagate. Hillary's crimes in particular, especially her Uranium One deal and the Skolkovo scam, involved large networks of accomplices in the State Department and in Intel, including the FBI when it was under Robert Mueller. And since they were conducted under the Obama administration, they implicated Obama too, and many around him. Last week's antics featured two dazzling features of American diplomacy under the Obama-Biden shadow government: the president's stupid obloquies against Vladimir Putin, and Secretary of State Antony Blinken's feckless negotiation with China, in which China nullified our human rights complaints involving the Uyghurs on account of America's incessantly self-declared systemic racism. Coming up this week, Joe Biden's long-delayed premier news conference, even though the questions are all pre-submitted and vetted, and the answers will be scrolling on a teleprompter. Biden will be working without a net. Yes, you see, they have dug a huge pit for themselves. Systemic racism, oh, the original sin of slavery, Jim Crow, redlining, whatever. And oh, but we're going to talk about how bad other countries are. Well, the Chinese aren't buying it, and of course, the Biden administration has given them a way out of this. Because the Democrats and, the media, the elite as a whole, never misses an opportunity to talk about how evil America is and how evil it has always supposedly been. But they never thought that there could possibly be any consequences. Biden told George Stephanopoulos, I wasn't being a wise guy. I was alone with him in his office, and that's how it came about. It was when President Bush had said, I've looked in his eyes and saw his soul. I said, I looked in your eyes and I don't think you have a soul. He looked back and said, we understand each other. Oh, yeah. Let's have the audio of this, okay? Because that conversation never took place. And it is just so revealing of the stupidity of people who know pass for the elite, that they're trying to sell us on the idea that this conversation actually did take place. And of course, the conversation gets worse than that. This is from the New York Times. President Biden's economic advisors are pulling together a sweeping $3 trillion package to boost the economy, reduce carbon emissions, and narrow economic inequality, beginning with a giant infrastructure plan that may be financed in part through tax increases on the corporations and the rich. Oh, but $3 trillion, is that enough? No, currently it isn't. I'll say one thing about the left. They know how to reward their allies. Biden's advisors plan to recommend that the effort be broken into pieces, with Congress tackling infrastructure before turning to a second package that would include more people-focused proposals like free community college, universal pre-kindergarten, and a national paid leave program. Free community college. Why don't they just take tens or hundreds of billions of dollars and burn them in a pit? Oh, if everyone gets a college education, then all the problems solve themselves somehow. I hesitate to call graduates of community colleges members of the elite, but in a way they are. And America and the rest of the West already faces a tremendous overproduction of elites, which leads to alienation because there's not enough elite slots to go around. And it frequently leads to hatred, as we saw in the streets of America last year. Hatred and violence. How many members of Antifa, how many of the people, trying to build down the courthouse in Portland, Oregon, every night for the last 6, 7, 8 months, how many of those do you think are community college graduates or graduates of places like Portland State University? Here's a piece by the Z-Man in Tacky's magazine called A Wilderness of Lies. Way back in the before times, a regular feature of the media was the criminologist who would be brought in to explain something about the Soviet Union. Strictly speaking, criminology and Sovietology were different things. The former focused on Russia and its role in the Soviet system. The latter focused on the Soviet Union as a whole, as if it was a single organism. The terms were often used interchangeably in the Cold War. Further, the media version of the criminologist was something like the court astrologer, in that they were tasked with using their secret knowledge to explain what was happening with the Russians. If Brezhnev was seen as distracted at a public ceremony, the criminologist would be brought in to explain its meaning. And criminology and Sovietology, criminology became a carnival act towards the end of the Cold War, but they were useful to statecraft, however, as the Soviet system was a black box. The West had its spies, but many of those spies were double agents used to feed the West false information. In the wilderness of mirrors that was the rivalry between East and West, the criminologist was useful in helping to sort the facts from the deliberate fictions. They helped contextualize Kremlin behavior. No doubt the roles are now reversed. The rest of the world is forced to develop experts at analyzing the American regime in order to understand what is going on in Washington and why it is happening in the Soviet Union. The rhetoric changed from one administration to the next, but public policy, especially foreign policy, did not change. Then we get Donald Trump, the Z-Man writes. The logic of the American political class said that a populist firebrand could never win a primary, much less a general election. The system made sure of that after the Perot and Buchanan scares. Trump wins, and official Washington has a nervous breakdown trying to expel him from the Capitol. Eventually, they replace Trump with a dementia patient, and the empire no longer makes any sense. The Soviet analogy is not a perfect one, of course. Trump was more like Khrushchev, a reformer who failed to reform the system and was pushed out by hardliners. Biden, on the other hand, is a good analog for Yuri Andropov and Konstantin Chernenko, two men long past their prime who were installed as placeholders. They did not last long and were eventually replaced with a younger man, which is what will happen with Biden. Again, I have to say that this metaphor of criminology could be applied very well to my own country of Canada. What is going on here? Does anyone have a plan for dealing with the self-induced disaster of COVID-19? Not as far as I can see. Where is the money going to come from for this orgy of spending? Again, Canada is not the world's reserve currency. Canada has to borrow money. It cannot simply produce it. But apparently that doesn't make any difference. Everything is going to be all right. Oh, we'll just destroy the oil and gas industry, notwithstanding the fact that despite the enormous benefits to provinces like British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, the enormous ancillary benefits, directly responsible for 18% of the revenues of my country, or it was. But we'll just leave all that in the ground because, we're going to have a new green economy now. Oh, so you're building the green economy, this other economy, the not green economy, that is going to have to exist in tandem, right? So you're going to have two at the same time. You ever thought about how expensive that is going to be? Leave aside the fact that it is not yet known whether a green economy can run at scale, but not important. Not important in the slightest. Throughout my lifetime, actually after the Six-Day War in 1967, American presidents were typically obsessed with the so-called peace process, beginning with Lyndon Johnson in 1968, I believe. And it got nowhere. Trump actually seems to have made some success in that area. He moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the world was supposed to fall in, but it did not. And he actually brokered a number of deals between Israel and Muslim countries in the Gulf. But now the neocons are back in charge, and neoconservatism is a mystery religion. And what is at the heart of that mystery? Death. is at the heart of that mystery. Neoconservatism is a death cult. That, oh, let's pick a fight with Russia, let's pick a fight with China, let's pick a fight with Iran, all at the same time. Pretty clever. Even as we hear very disquieting things about the condition of the United States Armed Forces. Ooh, they get to wear nail polish now, the women. Ooh, and sexy haircuts. And there are maternity flight suits for pilots. All pretty scarifying to the enemy, wouldn't you say? Anatoly Karlin writes at uns.com, there's been reports of a Ukrainian military buildup in the Donbass for several weeks now. The Saker, amongst others, has also reported on them, quoting a Telegram blogger who is claimed to have good sources in Kiev. A while ago, an order came from the office of the old Senator Biden to prepare the VSU for an offensive in the Donbass, but wait for the final go-ahead from the White House. At the same time, the source also said that similar military operations will be conducted in other countries where there are Russian interests in order to deflect the public attention from the Donbass and weaken any support for the Donbass. So there has been a hypothesis that has been thrown out that the purpose of provoking a Russian intervention could finally provide the U.S., Karlin writes, with the arguments to finally pressure Germany into shutting down Nord Stream 2, just a few months before its projected completion. Contra popular conceptions, Germany is more invested into NS2 than is Russia and stands to lose relatively more from a last-minute torpedoing of the project. NS2 threatens to deprive the Ukraine of $2 to $3 billion in annual transit fees. These are not insignificant sums for a country with a GDP of $150 billion and are well worth the lives of a few hundred Ukrainian soldiers who, as Strana's sources report, plan to stop the offensive and probably retreat should Russian troops go in. Could they really be this crazy? Well, Victoria Nuland was the leader of a coup that overthrew the legitimate government of the Ukraine, and the Ukraine is now owned by foreign powers. Despite this disaster, I read that Victoria Nuland, she's still around. Still around. Of course, she is married to Robert Kagan, neoconservative supremo. According to Wikipedia, on January 5th, it was reported that Biden would nominate Nuland to serve as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs under Secretary-designate Antony Blinken. On February 13th, her nomination was formally submitted to the Senate for confirmation. Yeah, let's foment a war with Russia. Just see how it goes. Roll the dice. Now, RT is, of course, paid for by the Russian government, but so is, Canadian CBC, paid for by the Canadian government. BBC is paid for by the British government. If one of them is a propaganda outlet, then the rest of them are. This is a story from 2 days ago by Kit Clarenberg. In recent weeks, RT has run a series of articles based on leaks by Hacktivist Collective Anonymous, exposing UK government information on warfare efforts targeted at Russia. The British mainstream media has ignored the story. An earlier report revealed how UK Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office contractor Albany Associates proposed to infiltrate civil society at every level in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania for London's benefit. The Baltic states, all members of NATO, and they weren't supposed to be, because Gorbachev was promised that NATO would not move east in exchange for the transfer of nuclear weapons from the Warsaw Power country. You don't hear very much about that in the media for a good reason. Anyway, the Baltic states are considered strategically vital by London and Washington. They're also home to a sizable Russian-speaking population, a legacy of the countries once being constituent states of the Soviet Union. Albany was just one of several firms potentially running FCDO-funded PSYOPs in the region. Zinc Network, which has conducted a variety of clandestine operations for the UK government at home and abroad, is another. In response to an FCDO tender, according to the leaks, the company submitted extensive proposals pledging to build a vibrant and innovative independent media sector in the Baltic states, which aligns credible brands, online communities of interest, and quality content to service highly specific audience segments. Among other eyebrow-raising covert strategies, the company offered to disseminate anti-Russian propaganda via the recruitment and promotion of stand-up comedians. Profiles of individuals involved in the proposed campaign indicate Irve Eslas was intended to sit on its advisory board. She is currently advisor to Tuomas Hendrik, Estonian president from 2006 to 2016. From 1988 to 93, he ran the Estonia desk of Radio Free Europe, the U.S. state-run propaganda network. Now, so foreign governments are going to pay to buy off reporters in the Baltics. Now, I've mentioned this before. It's long been my suspicion that many supposedly independent journalists in my own country are, in fact, working for intelligence agencies. One of the clues to recognizing such people is their standard of living. Journalists aren't paid that much. There's a handful of journalists who earn handsome salaries, but most don't. I suppose more important would be the publication of books, the continued publication of books that nobody wants to read. There's a kind of vanity press that exists, well, certainly for academicians, in which they pay companies with respectable names, for their unreadable works to be published. But when certain reporters have books published by top publishers, and you know that these books are not going to sell more than a couple thousand copies at best, well, one has to assume that these intelligence agencies are buying up many thousands of copies, or alternately just paying off the publisher not to care that the book sells 1,000 or 2 and then gets remaindered after 6 months. As such, according to this plan, a minimum of 15 journalists, 6 in Estonia and Latvia, 3 in Lithuania, would be identified for recruitment and offered personal brand strategy informed by individual target audience analysis, help with growth strategies for the chosen social media platform, including blogs, Facebook, and Twitter, and digital marketing and campaign training. Articles ostensibly written by these individuals would be inserted on international and regional quality news sites, and regular slots with media outlets supported via our other activities, including state broadcasters and private sector platforms, would also be provided. Some years ago, a friend of mine, a university professor from Eastern Europe, noting a change, a sea change, one might say, in the media coverage in the country from which he had come, he worked out one night just how much it would cost to buy up the journalists in his country, and came to the conclusion that it wouldn't cost very much money at all. Money well spent, one might say. Pat Buchanan writes today, our mainstream media largely ignored it. The world media did not. Ascending the stairs of Air Force One on Friday to fly to Georgia, President Joe Biden slipped and stumbled. Getting up, he slipped and again and then fell. The scene was jolting and disquieting. Adversaries abroad will use it as a metaphor for the decline of the last superpower to emerge from the Cold War. And while our major media may scoff at it, there is talk all over this town about what appears to be the visibly declining physical and mental capacity of this oldest of American presidents at 78. Biden's press conference on Thursday, after the longest delay before a first presidential press conference since Calvin Coolidge, will be closely monitored as Reagan's second debate in 1984, after he seemed to suffer a mental lapse in his first debate with Fritz Mondale. I remember watching that debate, and as a partisan of Reagan, I remember rising panic throughout the last, 15 minutes of the debate, where he starts talking about some time he took a journey on the Pacific Coast Highway. And I'm thinking, come on, get to the point, Ronnie, get to the point. Oh my God, there is no point. He's just going to keep talking about nothing until he runs out of time. And I seriously wondered at the time whether this had, in a sense, disqualified him from being elected president. He won, but let's say Joe Biden's stumbles, of which there have been so very many, have just been ignored. Again, from Pat Buchanan, asked bluntly by George Stephanopoulos if he believes Russian President Vladimir Putin is a killer, Joe Biden answered, I do. He added that he once told Putin to his face that he had no soul. No, that never happened. Biden also indicated that new sanctions would be imposed on Russia for the poisoning of dissident Alexei Navalny and for meddling in the 2020 U.S. election to allegedly help Donald Trump. Russia also faces U.S. sanctions for building the Nord Stream 2 pipeline under the Baltic to deliver natural gas to Germany. With its president being called a killer by the U.S. president, Russia called Ambassador Anatoly Antonov home for consultations. In other times, such an exchange would bring the two nations to the brink of war. What is Biden doing? Do we not have enough enemies? Does he not have enough problems on his plate? The May 1 deadline for full withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan, negotiated a year ago with the Taliban, is just 6 weeks off. Do we stay and soldier on or depart? No decision has been announced. If we stay, our forces in Afghanistan could again come under fire. If we leave, the Kabul regime could be shaken to its foundation and fall. Leaving would be an admission that the U.S. failed and the war is lost. After the recent U.S.-South Korea military exercises, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un's sister issued this threat to the Biden administration. We take this opportunity to warn the U.S. administration trying hard to give off powdered smell in our land that if it wants to sleep in peace for the coming 4 years, it had better refrain from causing a stink at its first step. Buchanan comments, there is talk of new North Korean tests of missiles and nuclear weapons. Secretary of State Blinken said in Tokyo this week the U.S. goal remains the complete denuclearization of North Korea, but Presidents Bush II, Obama, and Trump all failed to achieve that goal. Again, yes, Buchanan is absolutely right. What, not enough problems on your plate? A famous man once said, sufficient unto this day is the evil thereof. I guess Biden, despite being such a devout Roman Catholic, disagrees with Jesus Christ about this. Gregory Hood writes on UNS, the U.S. faces threats in Europe and the Pacific. In February, President Biden declared America is back and diplomacy is back. Over the past 2 weeks, Biden said, I've spoken with leaders of many of our closest friends, Canada, Mexico, the UK, Germany, France, NATO, Japan, South Korea, Australia, to begin reforming the habits of cooperation and rebuilding the muscle of democratic alliances that have atrophied over the past few years of neglect and, I would argue, abuse. Yes. And Hood goes on to explain that apparently Trump was a bad man because he pointed out repeatedly and forcefully that the other NATO partners were not paying their fair share. I recall that as early as 1979, I believe it was, Irving Kristol proposed the dissolution of NATO. What purpose does it serve? Well, 40 years later, still there. I'm looking at co-chair of the Gender Policy Council and chief of staff to the First Lady, Julissa Reynoso. Okay. And I thought it was a very odd look for this woman. She's sitting at the podium, standing at the podium at the White House, and she looks as if she's about to burst into tears. And then I did an image search for her and found out that every picture of her, she seemingly looks as if she is about to burst into tears. Hood writes, serious nations are calling the empire's bluff. The Russians say American dissidents are seeking Russian citizenship. President Biden recently called President Putin a killer. In response, Putin smirkingly challenged Joe Biden to a debate and wished him good health. Yeah, as Kunstler says, Putin ate no corn pop. Let's have a look at the chat. Imagine telling the whole world that you told the president of the Russian Federation to his face that he had no soul and was evil. What good could possibly come of that? HIV positive transgender says Disney is an abomination. Half in the Bag review had a hilarious joke about the Flash hot dog scene, says Palcasso 88. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was pretty good. I believe it involved Bryan Singer. Is this getting close to a weekend at Bernie's presidency? Do you share his love of bagpipes, Kevin? Whose love of bagpipes? Is that a reference to the musical instrument or something else? Okay. Putin is so much more with it than Sleepy Joe, says Hikmah Warrior. Oh, William Barr brought bagpipes back to the White House first, says Friends. You know, Thomas Beecham, the great conductor, was once asked by a woman, a lot of stories about Thomas Beecham, Sir Tommy, probably apocryphal, that she wanted her son to learn a musical instrument and what would he recommend. And Beecham supposedly said, the bagpipes. Well, why? The mother asked. Essentially, the joke goes that there's no way of telling whether you're good at them or not good at them. On the advice of Barry O, Mayor Pete, Emmy Kay, and Lizzie Warren all dropped out after South Carolina, says Jim Smith. Yes, indeed. Strange. Perma Oligarchy says Hikmah Warrior. MF Superstar says Ford attended the University of Michigan, where he played center, linebacker, and long snapper for the school's football team and helped the Wolverines to 2 undefeated seasons and national titles. Indeed. And Jerry Ford was nowhere close to being as stupid as the media made him out to be. Okay. Do we have anything else here? Oh, we're talking about Nathan Coffness here. Okay. Jonathan Paul says to believe Nathan Coffness, you would have to think losers like Kamenev, Zinoviev, and Yagoda, who couldn't save their own lives, were all geniuses, but Stalin an idiot because the first were Jews. I don't know. Does anyone think that Stalin was an idiot? I mean, was he not the most successful politician of the 20th century? You know, an unbelievably wicked man, but no, he was really good at politics. And Jaakko Raipala, our Finnish friend, says it's supposedly a great thing. Oh, first of all, one of the major Finnish newspapers just published an article celebrating Biden and Finland finally taking the side of NATO against Russia with all the deals that politicians have quietly signed. Oh, did you see that they're making noises about right-wing extremists and the grave danger to Finland? I saw that. Supposedly a great thing for our democracy. Only 20% of the Finnish population supports NATO, but NATO is the empire of democracy. By definition, even if our undemocratic people are against it. Putin is literally hilarious, says Hikmah Warrior. Yes, he can be a very witty man, a dry wit. Oh, so how about some terror porn here? This is from Agence France Presse. We are in a new pandemic due to virus variant, says Mutti Merkel. And that was the tenor of the story. All the stories over the last 4 or 5 days from the Daily Mail. Germany heads for new lockdown, and Netherlands and Belgium warn restrictions may have to be extended after thousands of fed-up French break rules at a street carnival amid Europe's COVID third wave. Merkel is meeting with German regional leaders today, and non-essential shops likely to be closed in hard-hit areas with reopenings of bars and restaurants delayed. Meanwhile, thousands of fed-up French defied lockdown in Marseille and packed out Paris at the weekend. I'm certainly glad to see the pictures of that. Delighted, in fact, They seem to have reached their natural limit. In France, John Henley in The Guardian, lockdowns return or extended as third wave of COVID sweeps Europe. Plans to ease restrictions have been rolled back in several countries owing to new variants taking hold. Ooh, scary new variants. What does William Briggs, statistician to the stars, have to say about that? This is for men who have sired children only. Ladies, avert your eyes. This, the shortest horror film ever made, explains mask mandates, lockdowns, injecting female hormones to cure the corona doom, discussed below. Everything. It's from @AmericanKrogan, with a K, and it's for people who style themselves the Try Guys, who are quite possibly the most effeminate men I've ever seen in my life, although they don't appear to be homosexual, almost wetting their pants because Dr. Anthony Fauci is going to make an appearance with them. How about it? Instead of a vaccine, we get mass testosterone supplements. Briggs writes, remember how Texas allowing liberty was boldly predicted by experts to have doomed the state? Didn't happen. And he shows that Texas is not, they're not all dying there. Deadly variants. This is the paper that caused Nicholas Nassim Taleb, or is it Nassim Nicholas Taleb, to go into a closet and cover. He's been a shivering leaf since the beginning of this, barking at those not as frightened as he. The latest panic is about variants. Would the vaccines work against these new horrors? To those who have never read about viruses before, when mutations were inevitably discovered for the corona doom, they came as a shock and became a reason to keep punishing and useless solutions in place so that they can feel safe. He writes about this paper, which discusses the AstraZeneca vaccine and the B1351 South African variant. The paper tells us this vaccine doesn't do well against this variant, which set off Taleb and other fearful. Yet here is an explanation why the paper is good news. Just over 2,000 HIV-free people in South Africa were given the vaccine or placebo. First good news, there were no cases of severe disease or hospitalization in either group 3 weeks after the second dose. No as in none, nada, zippo. And in nobody had worse than a cold. Some good news, the infection rate is thus only 3%. First good news repeated, the mortality rate in this group was 0%. Hospitalization rate was 0%. Okay, so you're infected with a disease. All right, sounds bad. What if the disease is wholly unsymptomatic? Well, then obviously it's not as important as we might think. It's certainly not as terrifying as we might think. Briggs writes, we also saw last week the media reporting giving female hormones to men cures their corona doom, or words like that. The reporting was based on a weak paper. Briggs writes, England has been leading the way in expertology. First, we had the serially wrong but never filed Neil Ferguson and his forecast of 56,000 people dying per day of the corona doom. Then we had their leaders believe the models because those models were made by experts. The models promised lockdowns and mask mandates would work, which of course they did since they assumed these things. All models only say what they're told to say, but England's boss got the box and it turned him into a shivering blob of jelly, unable to comb his hair or see a path to freedom. Now we have even more experts with credentials in expertology saying masks and social distancing rules could stay in place for several years until the world returns to normality. It seems this is never going to end. It seems that it's never going to end. It's been going on for a year now, and we are almost at the end of March. But let's see, April, May, June, July, August, September. Ooh, we just have a few months left until we're back into fall. And so we're all going to have to wear masks again, keep up that social distancing. Despite the vaccines, now we were assured We were assured in Canada, the United States, Britain, and other places that once the vaccines were rolled out, people could go back to normal. And now we're being told, no. Didn't you hear? There's no such thing as normal anymore. Based on recent protests in Britain, I would say that that country is on the edge of anarchy. Meanwhile, here in America, North America that is, we're getting fat or fatter. This is a study from the American Psychological Association. Slightly more than 6 in 10 adults, 61% report undesired weight gain change since the start of pandemic. Undesired weight change, okay. In other words, getting fatter. I suppose there's some people who, like to gain weight. People who, bodybuilders, people who lift weights competitively, football players, not many others. Among U.S. adults, 42% reported undesired weight gain, and the average 26 pounds. Sorry, for U.S. adults, 29 pounds. For men, 37 pounds. For women, 22. Gen Z, 28 pounds. Millennials, 41 pounds. Yikes. This is said to be adults 25 to 42. Gen Xers, 21 pounds. Boomers, 16 pounds. Let's look at this racially. White adults, 30 pounds. Hispanic adults, 28 pounds. Black adults, 35 pounds. Asian adults, 12 pounds. Parents, 36 pounds. And so-called essential workers, 38 pounds. Now you can see, if we're interested in consequences, and I think we are, that this is going to lead to a significant increase in heart disease, diabetes, and other debilitating conditions. This gain of 26, 29 pounds or whatever is going to push a lot of people into the category of morbid obesity, which is the category you least want to be in if you're interested in, living. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Mary Ramsey, the head of immunization of Public Health England, said masks and other social distancing restrictions are likely to remain in place for years because the public has become used to them. Yeah, how strongly do they feel about this? One of the difficulties with polling is that it can't really measure intensity. What matters, it doesn't matter so much how many people say they're in favor of something or the other, or against it, but how strongly they feel about it and what measures they are willing to take in order to enforce their views on others. Chris Whitty, who is the chief latrine walla of England, he said that the pandemic restrictions, the lockdowns, had improved life for some people. Again, this is from Summit News. While recognizing that people are exercising less and drinking more as a result of lockdown and that domestic abuse had increased, the professor argued that many people have actually enjoyed it. For some people, lockdown has either made no difference, or in some cases, if you actually look at the academic literature and surveys, has even improved life. Interestingly, let's see, exercising less, drinking more domestic abuse, and let's not even talk about the panic, the terror, the alienation. But some people are enjoying it. People like Professor Chris Whitty, for example. Many have suggested that high levels of support for lockdown is a form of Stockholm syndrome, though the fact that most people's wages were covered by a government furlough scheme, allowing them to stay at home and avoid work in some cases, is definitely also a factor. Let's just keep that up forever. Let's just keep paying not to work, because governments don't need revenues, and you don't get to work and you still get paid. And how long can they keep that up for? Weeks after the first lockdown was introduced last year, a poll found that 9 out of 10 Brits wanted to see it continued. Another more recent poll found that over half of Brits say they will miss either some or many aspects of lockdown. Aside from the mental health impact and the untold numbers of future deaths as a result of people having missed treatment and screenings for serious illnesses, the UK's economy contracted the most in 300 years as a result of the lockdown, leading to job losses of 726,000. We'll just give them all government jobs. We'll give them all good-paying green energy jobs, because those can be just conjured out of thin air. And let's take a look at lockdown skeptics quickly. How closely does the trajectory of the epidemic in each country resemble a flu season? Yes, it does. More than 200,000 children currently self-isolating at home. Yeah, that's going to end well. Let's have a look at Alex Berenson's invaluable Twitter feed. And then I'm going to talk about what happened in Boulder, Colorado. Okay. Paperback coming soon, he announces, for his pamphlet, Unreported Truth about COVID-19 and Lockdowns. So just as happened with Unreported Truth 3, Amazon seems to be sitting on the paperback after allowing the ebook. We'll see if they wind up allowing both or banning them. Looks like in-person galas will be back this fall in New York City. The dinger isn't exaggerating. First time for everything. What's happening in Brazil deserves attention, but it's probably a typical seasonal spike exacerbated by hysterical news coverage. Bolsonaro is to the Brazilian media as Trump was to the U.S. As far as underfunded hospitals in a country with severe income inequality, so far no variants have proven more dangerous than the original SARS-CoV-2, and it isn't even clear how much more quickly they spread. Yeah. And, of course, there seems to be some problems with the reported efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and this is from the U.S. government itself. From today's White House presser, will Uncle Joe be a good president or the best president? Answer, history will decide. You will never lie to us, right? Not in a million years. Promise? Yes. What if it's bad news? There will be no bad news. Yay! And then, yay! Oh, yes, children in cages. You remember how Trump was the wickedest man on earth because of children in cages? Well, children in cages are back, but it's, infradig to report on this. What are you supposed to do with unaccompanied minors? What, 15 years old, 12 years old, 10 years old, 8 years old who show up in the United States? Are they just supposed to run free? Okay, let's have a look at the chat. Millennials packing on 41 pounds average. I hear that right? Okay, well, I didn't mention that Berenson is suspicious of these figures. All I see are paunchy younger fellas in this hood dragging their mutt girlfriends, often obese themselves, says Hikmah Warrior. Steve says, nice Animal House reference, fat, drunk, and addicted to TV is no way to go through life, son. And staring at the mind viruses on their Pavlov phone, says Hikmah Warrior. Hello, Tom Anderson. Thank you for your kind words. Emma Kelly-Zer says the laughter you hear is Herbert Stein's ghost, knowing that his law will soon be taking hold with a vengeance soon. You remember when deficits were a huge concern, particularly in the 1990s? There was a whole election fought for over this in Alberta, where I was living at the time. And one party was saying, we need to crush deficits. And the other party was saying, we need to eviscerate deficits, something like that. And then it was decided, deficits don't matter anymore. Don't matter anymore. You just keep borrowing money. It's free. Borrowing money is free, and it will be free forever. Professor Pohl says Kaganovich was in Stalin's inner circle from 1930 to 1955 and can't be compared to Trotsky or Yagoda as part of the pre-1936 system. Oh, Miami's twerkified war zone, according to Gandalf White II. Yeah, I will have something to say about that if there is time. Oh, yeah. This is from heavy.com, which is very good, this sort of thing. Ahmad Alyssa, Boulder shooting suspect, 5 fast facts you need to know. He's a 21-year-old Colorado man who appears to be going bald, judging by the pictures I've seen, who was then identified in the suspect in the mass shooting at a King Soopers grocery store in Boulder that left 10 people dead, including Boulder police officer Eric Talley. I read that Officer Talley, late Officer Talley, was a traditionalist Roman Catholic, traditional Latin Mass, who leaves 7 children. Police were called. 2:40 p.m. Turned into a bloodbath. What on Vox Day, someone was mentioning that, I don't know, were we just inured to this? That a bunch of people were standing around, taking videos as some fellow was shooting everybody? Strange. Alyssa was born in Syria and spent most of his life in Colorado, he wrote on Facebook. He wrote about Islam on social media and said Muslims might not be perfect, but Islam is. He bought a Ruger AR-556 semi-automatic rifle on March 16th, days before the shooting. He did not say anything to officers at the scene, but did ask for his mother. Alyssa's brother said he was mentally disturbed and paranoid. His motive remains under investigation. His brother said he was deeply disturbed, very antisocial and paranoid. In high school, he said he was being chased. Someone is behind him. Someone is looking for him. Syrian refugees, we were told by the Red Cross that 40% of them, when they were in the refugee camps, they displayed severe mental problems. But of course, that's exactly the sort of people that one wants to bring to Canada and the United States, because it would be cruel to favor our own people over strangers. This is from the Daily Mail. Syrian-born gunman Ahmad Alyssa was known to the FBI and ranted about Islamophobes hacking his phone before killing 10 at a Boulder grocery store with an assault rifle he bought 1 week ago. Yeah, apparently this was a white man, we were told. And then when it turned out that he is not white, let's not talk about that anymore. Let's not do that. It doesn't. Amy Siskind tweeted, the shooter is taken into custody. In other words, it was almost certainly a white man. Again, if he were black or brown, he would be dead. And then later, she tweeted, let's mourn the victims, but not glorify the killer with the attention of having his name widely known. Matt Callahan says, Arab guy kills cop father of 7 and a bunch of white people. All we will hear about is gun control. White kills some Asians and other white people. It 100% had to be racism. They have foolproof narratives for any situation. Nick Mongillo says, when it's a white shooter, the nation's biggest issue is white supremacy. When it's a shooter of any other race, it's ban all guns. Yeah, 6 of one, half a dozen or the other. This is from Alam Bakari at Breitbart. Twitter failed to respond to repeated requests for comment about a tweet from The Root that compared whiteness to a disease, refusing to say if the tweet violates its policies against dehumanizing language. Twitter had said in December, our primary focus is on addressing the risks of offline harm, and research shows that dehumanizing language increases that risk. From The Root, whiteness is a pandemic. This is in response to the Atlanta shootings. In the linked article, the Root blogger Damon Young makes extensive comparisons between white people and disease. Whiteness is a public health crisis. It shortens life expectancies. It pollutes air. It constricts equilibrium. What? It devastates forests. It melts ice caps. It sparks and funds wars. It flattens dialects. What? It infests consciousnesses and it kills people. Again, with people of this ilk, simply replace whites or white people with witches, and it has exactly the same effect. Whiteness is a pandemic. This is what people in the academy called eliminationist language. Very strong helter-skelter vibe these days. That white people are literal demons. And what do you do with demons? I'm not going to spell it out, but I think that people understand. Well, I suppose there's some people who, some Satanists out there, but for everyone else, demons are not held very highly. Nice work if you can get it. From the Wall Street Journal, Prince Harry is taking on a new job title, Chief Impact Officer at Better Up. What is Better Up? Well, according to its website, it uses technology and science to enrich the coaching experience, empowering people to learn new skills, conquer their goals, ignite fresh passions, and become the best versions of themselves. 97% increase in goal, it says. Chief Impact Officer. When you name someone Chief Impact Officer, what you were saying is, we have so much money, we can pay lots of money to someone or many people not to do anything, not to work, in fact. The Duke of Sussex is going to work for the unicorn employee coaching and mental health startup. Unicorn? In his latest foray into business. Prince Harry, businessman. Yeah, doing well by doing good, they call it. And I'm going to talk now about James Burnham's The Machiavellians. And he is talking about the present day. Keep in mind, this book was written during the Second World War at a time when it appeared that Germany and not the Allies might be the victor of that war. Burnham begins, it has become fashionable to say we are in the midst of a revolution. There's something rather ludicrous in the spectacle of well-paid ministers telling their congregations all about the great revolution in which they live, or a 75-year-old bank president explaining world revolution to an after-dinner audience. When we examine what is said, it becomes doubtful how seriously we should take the revolutionary phrases. The strict communists tell us Russia is the revolution, and all the rest of the world capitalist and counter-revolutionary. Others, like Hermann Rauschning, say that Nazi Germany is the revolution, and that what the world needs is a conservative counter-revolution to be led by England and the United States. Still others, like Herbert Agar or Vice President Wallace, say that the two revolutions are going on, a bad revolution led by the Nazis and a good revolution of the people or the common man, led or to be led by the United Nations. As for the kind of revolution, it is indiscriminately labeled as communist or socialist or internationalist or national socialist or people's or fascist or monopolist. We may reasonably conclude that a majority, at least, of the revolutionary commentators have not made up their minds what they are talking about. I should note, the time this book was written, at a time when, as I say, it appeared that Germany could win the war, you see a movement, an intellectual movement towards National Socialism. You see this very, very strongly in France, where, well, people don't like to be on the losing side. So many people who had been socialists and, top socialists in France, including a prime minister, decided that no, National Socialism was the future. International socialism, that was old hat. You see, even people in this circle of Jean-Paul Sartre moving towards this, because intellectuals, for the most part, they all want to be on the winning side. This is a case, however, Burnham writes, where words express more than the speakers are usually aware. For there really is a revolution, and we are in truth living in the midst of it. In the managerial revolution, I tried to summarize the general character of the revolution. I did so in the analysis I therein made, primarily in institutional, especially in economic terms. I propose here to redefine the nature of the revolution through the use of the Machiavellian principles. This is not at all arbitrary, since the present revolution was in fact anticipated in its general course predicted by the modern Machiavellians more than a generation ago. Their predictions are indeed a powerful confirmation of their principles. Moreover, there is no necessary conflict among several possible modes of analyzing historical events. Economic, political, sociological, cultural approaches to history do not have to contradict each other, since these various social factors are, at least to some extent, independently correlated. It is for this reason that we can often reach approximately the same conclusions about history from any of a number of quite different approaches. From a Machiavellian point of view, a social revolution means a comparatively rapid shift in the composition and structure of the elite and in the mode of its relation to the non-elite. It is possible to state the conditions under which such a rapid shift takes place. The principal of these conditions are the following. 1. When the institutional structure and the elite, which has the ruling position within this structure, are unable to handle possibilities opened up by technological advances and by the growth, for whatever reason, of new social forces. 2. When a considerable percentage of the ruling class devotes little attention to the business of ruling and turns its interest to such fields as culture, art, philosophy, and the pursuit of sensuous pleasure, and one might add, superhero movies. 3. When an elite is unable or unwilling to assimilate rising new elements from the masses or from its own lower ranks. Well, as we've discussed previously, America and the West, to a large extent, is becoming an oligarchy, even a hereditary oligarchy. And for this reason, public schools were smashed because the oligarchy does not want competition, rather. 4, when large sections of the elite lose confidence in themselves and the legitimacy of their own rule, and when in both elite and non-elite there is a loss of faith in the political formulas and myths that have held the social structure together. 5, when the ruling class, or much of it, is unable or unwilling to use force in a firm and determined way, and instead tries to rely almost exclusively on manipulation, compromise, deceit, and fraud. Well, let's look at Black Lives Matter and Antifa. Peaceful protests, mostly peaceful protests. How many hundreds of riots were there across the United States last year? But no, this was somehow legitimate. Oh, and we're all going to recognize George Floyd. Okay, but we want more and more and more. And, well, if you keep paying off people like this, we know what Kipling said about this. You'll never get rid of the Dane. Burnham continues, these are the general preconditions of social revolution in any culture. They characterize the age just ending as the modern Machiavellians understood. During the past several centuries, the major and most privileged section of the ruling class of the chief nations consisted of the capitalists or bourgeoisie, together with the closely related parliamentary type of politician. Soldiers, military men who had been so prominent in many ruling classes of the past, sometimes the exclusive rulers, were in a decidedly minor position. The legal formula, which expressed the privileged position of the capitalists, was summed up in the conception of individual property rights in the instruments of social production, which were accepted as giving the owner control over those instruments and a preferred share in their profits. The 5 revolutionary preconditions may readily be seen to hold for this private capitalist ruling class in a generation or more, which has just concluded, and I will explain those tomorrow. Reparations to descendants of slavery. I first heard about this in the 1960s. I think this is when it first became discussed popularly. Now, let's go back to, say, Civil Rights Act, 1965. So that was 56 years ago. So obviously, we are almost 3 generations past that, and the talk of reparations is louder than ever, which is counterintuitive, one might say. But I suppose not, because we live in an age, Shiva and I, Paul, compared to universal mental retardation. Someone called David Azarad, who was with Hillsdale College, writes for Newsweek, of all places, the idea that African Americans are owed reparations for slavery in 2021 is laughable. Slavery was abolished in 1865. All the former slaves and slave owners are long dead, as are their children. God himself does not visit the iniquity of the fathers past the 3rd or 4th generation, Deuteronomy 5:9, but we are now told to do so unto the 7th and 8th. The moral debt America incurred for slavery has long since been discharged. Some 750,000 men died in the bloodiest war in our history to end slavery. Since the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, pro-Black racial preferences have become the norm in every sector of American life. This past year, the poisonous lies peddled by Black Lives Matter have become the country's unofficial state religion. And yet, in spite of their manifest injustice, I would support reparations, but under one condition only. If America pays up, then everyone shuts up, and we all finally agree to go beyond race. No more racial grievances, no more white guilt, no more BLM rioting, no more Jussie Smollett hoaxes, no more preferential treatment and pathological pity for Black America. Those who feel aggrieved forgive. Those who feel guilty somewhat forget. And everyone moves on to the promised land of judging people not by the color of skin, but by the content of their character. Recrimination, revenge, and resentment finally give way to reconciliation. In exchange for reparations, at this point, what's a few more $1 trillion? America dismantles the entire system of policies and prejudices that consistently favor some at the expense of others based solely on skin color. Good luck with that. Wouldn't that be good for all Americans? He writes, alas, it will never happen. America's racial hucksters, black and white alike, would never agree to such a bargain. A post-racial America would be an unmitigated disaster for them. Who would still buy their platitudinous books, subsidize their anti-racism centers, and subject themselves to the diversity indoctrination sessions? Instead of charging $6,000 an hour lecturing corporate America on its white privilege, Robin DiAngelo would be selling plastic jewelry on the Home Shopping Network. Yes, quite right. There's a trial going on in Minneapolis, a trial of a police officer who was accused of murdering George Floyd. And this makes my head hurt. The Symbionese Liberation Army, their field marshal, field commander, Cinque or whatever, did he become a hero after that shootout in Los Angeles? Was his face plastered on walls all over America? No, it wasn't. George Floyd was a career petty criminal, a stupid man, and a really very ugly man. But he is legion. He is legion. Richard Greenhorn writes at the American Sun, to understand the Chauvin trial, it helps to first know that Minnesota's Attorney General is Keith Ellison. You know him. He was America's first Muslim congressman. After losing out on the top spot with the Democratic National Committee, he turned his eyes back to his adopted home state and the chance to bring a narco-tyranny to life. Ellison was elected to statewide office in 2018. The Minnesota GOP put a very good candidate against him that year, a Christian and an actual conservative, largely because the Minnesota GOP is full of losers and they expected him to lose. At the same time, it came out that Ellison was in the habit of beating up his girlfriend. It ended up not mattering. The press conjured up some high school gay bashing on the GOPers' part, and if Minnesota nice means anything nowadays, it means being really nice to gays and really, really nice to blacks. Minnesotan liberals will do anything to be nice to black criminals. They will even vote for them. It is worth remembering that Hennepin County attorney did not want to bring charges against Chauvin at first. It was clear that Floyd was an unsavory character, drug addict, violent criminal, part-time porno actor. The riots forced their hand, and even more, a BLM marketing blitz turned Floyd's ugly visage into a religious icon. Ellison's AG department is now running the show and running it incompetently. The biggest revelation since the trial began is the discovery of methamphetamine and fentanyl containing Floyd's DNA at the bottom of the squad car into which Floyd was being escorted. The drugs were discovered in January, 7 months after Floyd's death, and only because Chauvin's legal team undertook the new investigation itself. To call this an embarrassment is an understatement. There's been a clear show of force on the state's part, 5 or 6 prosecutors in the courtroom every day with others zooming in. That the state can spare so many lawyers but cannot do a proper forensic examination is insulting to anyone with enough dignity left to be insulted. There is more. Last week, the city of Minneapolis entered into a settlement with the Floyd family for $27 million. Happening in the middle of voir dire, it is hard to believe this was unintentional. As of Wednesday, it has resulted in at least 2 seated jurors being removed. There is a saying, you should not attribute to malice what can be pinned on incompetence. That doesn't make much sense when a central tenet of wokeism is staffing the incompetent. More than that, one of Keith Ellison's sons is on the city council. To claim that Ellison could have had no sway in preventing news about the $27 million payout is preposterous. So, if Chauvin is found not guilty, what? Minneapolis is going to go up in flames. But if you remember the Rodney King verdict, LA went up in flames, and then the U.S. Justice Department pulled a trick out of its bag of tricks. So there's no double jeopardy under the American legal system. The cops were put on trial again, but that's double jeopardy. No. They were tried for police brutality. And what are they being tried this time for? For violating Rodney King's civil rights. How exactly did they violate Rodney King's civil rights? By beating the shit out of him, i.e., police brutality. And, let's talk briefly about Miami. A happy riot, apparently, although the videos that I've seen, they don't seem very happy. A lot of punching in amongst all of the twerking. Mr. Commodity at Twitter writes, the national media will tell you Miami Beach issued a state of emergency and shut down because of the crowds, and some will lie and say it's because of COVID. That's only half the story. Here are some videos of what is really going on. This happened twice at the same restaurant, just a ferocious punch-up involving dozens of people with others fleeing in terror. And here's the aftermath. Everyone walked out on their tables, totaling over $2,000 before tips. Remember, this happened 2 nights in a row, but there's more. Walking out on the bill is so common during spring break that waiters are now having to chase down patrons and tackle them on the street. Oh yeah, and don't forget the women twerking and blocking traffic, which happens on every street corner. But wait, there's more. The fights are constant every day and night. At least 2 or 3 involved shootings. Mind you, this is a 10-block by 3-block area. It's not that big. But wait, there's more. The fights don't just end there. Ooh, no, they carry on to the airport, like these 2 ladies in Fort Lauderdale. This one is my favorite by far because these 2 don't even care that there's a cop there. But wait, there's more. Another night, another restaurant completely trashed. This time, a man decides to use a woman's head as a basketball on the asphalt. This is why Miami Beach issued a state of emergency. It has 0 to do with COVID and 100% to do with this type of nightly behavior. What you see are 2 things. Over-politicization of police work. The NAACP called Miami Beach Police Department racist last year. And this is what happens when you don't let the police do their jobs. Second, and more important, complete lack of foresight and planning by elected officials like Mayor Dan Gelber and company. He spent more time this past year on CNN complaining about Governor DeSantis than taking care of his own house. Yes, as we can see from other stories from the Associated Press and story here from Yahoo, from Agence France Presse, that this very quickly became a racial issue. Why? Too many black people were being arrested for violence and mayhem. And when a lot of black people are arrested under any circumstances anywhere in the United States, this is proof of systemic racism. It's proof. There could be no other explanation. Oh, yes, what fresh hell is this? This is from Kim Lyons at The Verge. Facebook is working on a version of Instagram for kids under 13, according to BuzzFeed News. The Facebook-owned company knows a lot of kids want to use Instagram. Head of Instagram, Adam Massari, said, but there isn't a detailed plan yet. But part of the solution is to create a version of Instagram for young people or kids where parents have transparency or control. It's one of the things we're exploring. Instagram's current policy bars children under 18 from the platform. Perhaps it should bar people from 16, 18, 25. Instagram is the greatest example, furthest extension of my principle that social media was invented to drive women crazy or crazier. Increasingly, kids are asking their parents if they can join apps that help them keep up with their friends, Joe Osborne, a Facebook spokesperson, said in an email to The Verge. Yeah, keeping up with your friends involves publishing to the entire world. Targeting online products at children under 13 is fraught not only with concerns about privacy, but legal issues as well. Facebook launched an ad-free version of its Messenger chat platform for kids in 2017, intended for kids between the ages of 6 and 12. Then in 2019, a bug in Messenger Kids allowed children to join groups with strangers, leaving thousands of kids in chats with unauthorized users. Yes, and I wonder what these unauthorized users were interested in. I'm going to move on to, well, let's have a quick look at the chat before I move on to Music Monday. The laughter you hear, yeah, Herbert Stein. Okay. If Chauvin gets acquitted, press 2. If Chauvin gets a guilty verdict, yes, the 1350s will take us back to, well, 1350, it seems. Full authoritarian control, warns Laponius Maximus Meridius. Okay, I'm going to talk about so-called authentic performance of serious or classical music, or historically informed performance, as we are supposed to call it now. The great Kingsley Amis once wrote, "Unquestioning devotion to authenticity is, in any department of life, a mark of the naive, or worse." Oh, yes, music is not being played the way it should be. It's not authentic. Well, you see, there's a tradition there. There was a tradition in music playing, which evolved over time. But classical music had a ground zero-like experience, I suppose. It began before 1970, but it really took hold in the 1970s. No, the violins are not supposed to be tuned like that. They're not supposed to be played like that. Let's move to a whole bunch of instruments that can't be held in tune. Let's play these pieces so fast that all the internal logic and rigor simply vanishes. Erwin Schmidt, who was in a group called Can, which I think you know that I love, he was a trained classical musician. He was a pianist and he was a conductor. He studied with István Kertész. He conducted the Vienna Symphony Orchestra and others, so he knows a little bit about what he speaks. He writes in the book From All Gates Open, the story of Can by Rob Young, which I highly recommend. Historical interpretation, this sometimes really gets on my nerves, this screech of string instruments. It's as if vibrato had been an invention of the Romantics. If memories of your own life are inaccurate or more or less inventions, how incredibly fictive is a historical interpretation? That could even become really dangerous. For example, not long ago, while listening to a Mozart piano concert on the radio in my car, the strings were sawing away, resembling the dullest 80s synth strings, a kind of mechanical dwarf baroque, but with a giant modern piano in front of it. I got so angry that I wasn't paying attention and ran a red light and just missed causing an accident by a hair. Yes, I was told about this, in the 1970s, and became exceedingly strong. I was de rigueur in the 1980s, and I bought a set of Haydn symphonies, which were conducted by Derek Salomons, and these appeared on Sony and been praised to the skies. And I just found it absolutely appalling. The strings sounded like scalded cats. Let's read from Wikipedia here. Given no sound recordings exist of music before the late 1970s, historically informed performance is largely derived from musicological analysis of texts. This is a very serious problem. Okay, we are going to change our performance in every way possible. Why? Because we want to sound, we want, say, Bach's Brandenburg concertos to sound as they would in the 1740s. How do you know what they sounded like in the 1740s? To the extent that they were played in the 1840s, how did you know what they sounded like then? Because we have no record of this. No record at all. And it's very difficult to go back in this way. It's impossible, actually. Absolutely impossible. I've noted before that there's a problem with the restoration of movies, as there is with the restoration of painting. That, oh, yes, when the Sistine Chapel was restored, so-called, or ruined, I would say, and this was paid for, I believe, the Japanese TV network NHK, people were shocked at the ugliness of it. Oh, that's what paintings looked like in those days. How do you know that? How do you know that? Well, will it become so dull? Yes, it was obscured by candle smoke, no question about that. But it is said, it was believed that lacquer was put on these paintings, not just to preserve them, but deliberately in order to tone down the colors. In the same way that if you're looking to restore a film, what you're going to get from the camera negative is not what was put on the screen. Now, if you're going to start messing about with the camera negative, then you run into a different kind of problem. But I'll mention one specific example, one which I've mentioned before. I think that whoever owns MGM these days did an outstanding job of restoring the James Bond films. They look tremendous. On the other hand, if you look at Goldfinger, you can see very prominent acne scarring on Sean Connery's face. There's no question in my mind that that was not present when the film was shown. If you look at the restoration of Technicolor movies, again, Technicolor was never supposed to look realistic, and it doesn't. That's part of one of the things that makes it so sometimes awesome. But what were the colors, three-step color process, what do they look like at the time? We don't know. We don't know. Because, anyone who saw the movies is probably dead, and their memories are not to be trusted in this regard. I think with the restoration of Hitchcock's Vertigo, here is a car driven by Jimmy Stewart, say, or, I don't know, Kim Novak, I forget which. And it's a particular type of car, of a particular year. And of course, there was a limited number of colors that you could get. And so the paint samples, chips, were found such that the green used in that car, well, now we know what the green looks like. And based on that, we can better guess what the other colors look like. According to a wiki, some critics contest the methodology of the historically informed movement, contending that its selection of practices and aesthetics are a problem of the 20th century and that it's ultimately impossible to know what performances in earlier times sounded like. Obviously, the older the style and repertoire, the greater the cultural distance and increased possibility of misunderstanding the evidence. For this reason, the term historically informed is now preferred to authentic, as it acknowledges the limitations of academic understanding rather than implying absolute accuracy, ho-ho, in recreating a historical performance style, or worse, a moralizing tone. All performances are historically informed. Every single one, because no one starts from zero. There is a performing tradition. Okay, so instruments over time became more powerful. They became louder. Let's look at the violin. It was strung tighter. That the A for tuning, higher cycles. That larger bodies of instruments were used over time. And I suppose in the apogee, you get performances like Gustav Mahler's performances of Beethoven, or you get in later years, Karajan's performances of Haydn and Mozart, and even before Karajan, you have Otto Klemperer, who is associated with a certain style of performance. This is big performances, big grand performances, and the tempi tend to be, well, not swift. But of course, there are fashions in music as to performance. There's always been fashions, and you see, going back quite some time, someone like Thurston Dart making an attempt to play music in a different way. Dart was born in 1921 and died in 1971, and he taught music at King's College, London. And he preferred thinner textures and faster speeds. You see around this time a return of the harpsichord and the clavichord. It was not controversial at all, for instance, in Mozart piano concertos, to use an actual piano, a grand piano. And I think this is absolutely correct. I mentioned Thomas Beecham before, and he famously compared the sound of a harpsichord to two skeletons copulating on a tin roof. The fact that a clavichord or a so-called forte pianoforte was used. You see, it's all clangy, clattery, and we got used to it. We got used to the bolder, bigger, more beautiful sounds. Now, Thurston Dart becomes enormously important, I suppose, through his association with Sir Neville Marriner. And Neville Marriner was a violinist who founded the Academy of St. Martin's in the Fields, which is one of the biggest selling outfits in classical music history. The ASM app began as a small band, and it became bigger. It took on musicians, according to the nature of the performances. It was rather shocking to some, or I don't know, something like 20 years after it was founded, it recorded Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. But again, you see with Neville Marriner, you see the lighter textures, you see the smaller number of musicians, and you see faster tempi. And Neville Marriner, as I mentioned, was enormously successful, second only to Herbert von Karajan in the number of recordings made. There's a famous New Yorker cartoon with a stereo playing some work, and there's a parrot on a stand, and the announcer on the radio says, yes, so such and such, conducted by Neville Marriner, conducted by the Academy of St. Martin's in the Fields, and then the parrot says conducted by Neville Marriner. That's how ubiquitous Marriner became. Now, you see that there were this fashion towards thinner, more lithed performances. It was not just in Britain, but you see it in Germany. Well, and you see it in the figure of one of the greatest musicians of the 20th century, who was the German Karl Rector. He was a great organist, conductor, instrumental, and choral. I saw him play a concert at Christchurch Cathedral, the Anglican Cathedral in Vancouver. I guess this would have been close to the end of his life in the late 70s. Such a stern and forbidding man in his photographs, almost frightening. But in this church, in this cathedral, the organ loft was hidden from the pews so that you couldn't see Rector playing. And after the end of each piece, it was an all-Bach program, he came out and appeared on the balcony and gave a very nervous smile and a sort of bashful bow. It was one of the most charming things I've ever seen. But Richter's interpretations of Bach were thought to be new, perhaps a little radical. Again, thinner, more lithe, faster. But then it was decided that Rector did not go anywhere near to where he should have gone. Again, ground zero. And Richter's life was rather blighted by this. He died at the age of 54. And I guess he'd been, in a way, sort of critically thrown onto the scrap heap. Oh, no. You don't want to listen to that anymore. We have much, much better, newer, grander, more radical. Thankfully, Rector made quite a few recordings for Deutsche Grammophon, Bach's organ music, instrumental choral music, his passions, Brandenburg Concerto, the orchestral suites, and they're available today. They're available even in high definition sound, and well, I can't recommend them more highly. You see other people as well, similar to Rector and Andrew. Neville Mariner. Andrew is his son. You see Raymond Leppard, the conductor. Again, very similar, in the tone or the style of recordings, but not radical enough. So you see the figure, I suppose the greatest figure, well, in the English-speaking world, was Christopher Hogwood, who died in 2014. He founded a group called the Academy of Ancient Music. On the continent, I suppose the greatest figure would be, well, there's Gustav Leonhardt. And you see, well, let's look at Bach's cantatas. Oh, well, no, we have to have just male voices singing them, not female voices, because they didn't use female voices at the time. I should mention another figure, David Monroe, but he goes back before the Baroque. He died at the age of 33 of suicide. He practically reinvented medieval music. And he worked on film too, Ken Russell's The Devils and Zardos by John Boorman, which I have praised on this live stream. So one of the most amusing things about the authentic music cult is that there's just a handful of musicians, say in London, who played this. And so you had all of these supposedly different orchestras, but there was all the same people and using the same instruments, because you had these reconstructions of what the supposedly authentic instruments were like. Of course, Nicholas Harmoncourt, I guess, was truly the greatest figure in this, but he was equally adept in both the new style and the old style. And near the end of his life, I suppose he became a traditional conductor, conducting big, grand performances of the biggest works with the Concertgebouw, the Vienna Philharmonic. He was considered one of the greatest conductors of his generation at the time that he died. One of the things I really don't like about this movement is these pretentious names that so many of these organizations have. The worst being, I suppose, La Petite Band. Or was there another one, Les Amis de Philippe? How about you name it based on where you come from what the Hanover Band, led by Roy Goodman, as one of those. John Elliott Gardner, I suppose he would have to be the most successful of the HIP musicians, but he has gone back and forth. I suppose he was, one might say, the acceptable face of this. His group was called the Orchestre Révolutionnaire Romantique. What this movement has done is just to drain the history from music. Why did this happen? Part of it, boredom. You play in a certain way, and there's a tradition that lasts for a long time, and I don't want to do that again. But how did the boredom come about? One of the reasons the boredom came about is because in the 1960s, particularly 1970s, I suppose there was an understanding that, no more good music is being written. No more serious, good classical music is being written. So we're going to have to go back to the past again and again and again. How many complete Beethoven cycles have there been? Over 1,000, perhaps? Do we really need any more new Beethoven cycles? Now, one of the happy results of the dearth of no good new music was that music that had been ignored, the great music of the past that had been ignored, was being rediscovered because the record companies needed to put something new out. So they went back into the past, and you see this rediscovery of the entirety of Johann Sebastian Bach's work. I mean, all of it, every single piece. You see the famous Phillips edition of the complete works of Mozart. You see the rediscovery of the great Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and not so great, but still tremendously good, I think, Johann Christian Bach, and many, many others. Now, in the time of this early rediscovery of, say, the Bach family, you get performances by groups that were not, heavy as, say, as Carry-On, but they were quite good, and then they started being pushed out by that which was supposedly authentic, or as Pinka Zukerman, the famous violinist, violist, and conductor, he called them the vegetarians. It's this very similar process to what Tom Wolfe wrote about in the Painted Word, that no, you see, it's not good without a theory. And the hipsters, as I will call them, they had a theory. That is to say, everything you know about music is wrong. And this was absolutely irresistible to the critics. I mean, there was some resistance at first, but I noticed that, certainly by the late 80s, early 90s, even the old Englishman at the Penguin Music Guide had thrown in the towel. Nope, they weren't going to resist it anymore, because there comes a point in intellectual movements that to resist is to make yourself seem, well, not just old-fashioned, but possibly worse, possibly immoral. It has been decided that this is the way to play these musics. Well, I prefer to listen to music that we're not hearing cracked notes constantly. We're not hearing the strings that sound like scalded cats. And again, I prefer to listen to music. Fast music is fine, but that which is so pell-mell that the musical line is lost, I have no interest in that. I'm curious as to how, let's see, here's a quote from Roger Scruton, who learned music, studied music late. He wrote, "The effect of the authenticists has frequently been to cocoon the past in a wad of phony scholarship, to elevate musicology over music, and to confine Bach and his contemporaries to an acoustic time warp. The tired feeling which so many authentic performances induce can be compared to the atmosphere of a modern museum. The early works of early composers are arranged behind the glass of authenticity, staring bleakly from the other side of an impassable screen. Richard Turiskin, who is always thought-provoking, he said, what we had been accustomed to regard as historically authentic performances, I began to see represented neither any determinable historical prototype nor any coherent revival of practices coeval with the repertories they addressed. Rather, they embodied a whole wish list of modernist values, validated in the academy and the marketplace alike by an eclectic, opportunistic reading of historical evidence. Well, I can't say better than that. Let's have a look at the chat before I sign off for the night. Bach auto-tuned is just Wendy Carlos, says VDR. Well, Wendy Carlos's performances of Bach, this is something new. This is something novel. You know, one of the reasons why I find it delightful is there's no attempt to say, oh, no, this is what it's really supposed to sound like. Well, no, obviously. These are synthesizers. They're not acoustic instruments. KMG wants auto-tune, says Bob Paxson. I hate auto-tune with a passion. When it was just used to fix bum notes, that was one thing, but now it's used to create this melisma, this endless melisma, this bending of vocal notes in a very unnatural way, in an inhuman way, on every line of a song. It becomes absolutely exhausting. It becomes sickening. I mean, I find it makes me physically ill. That's a huge mug of tea, says VDR. Yeah, it's about 20 ounces, actually. I don't like to, have to make it. Don't trip over that Ethernet cable fetching a glass of water in the middle of the night. Yeah, I worry about it. I do. I'm beginning to think it's only a matter of time. Wendy Carlos, quite a pioneer, if you know what I mean. Ogun's Iron. Some mystery about this person, because at one point, this person, Wendy or Walter Carlos, had a beard and was putting forward the notion that this was all a hoax. You know, what, pretending to be a man? Or, that I wasn't taken seriously, so I had to get noticed. But I don't know. It's all so strange. It's all so strange. WAP isn't even a good song, says VDR. At least when Robert Johnson sang about squeezing his lemon, it had some craft in it. Okay. What's coming up on the show this week? Amy Siskind. Oh. Okay. And what is coming up is on Theater Thursday, a revolutionary movie, I suppose, by Jean-Luc Godard in 1967 called Weekend, on April 1st for Holy Week. This is a film about the Middle Ages, about knights, and is by Eric Romer from 1978, and it is called Percival La Gaulois. It is one of the most physically beautiful movies I've ever seen, largely because it is almost wholly artificial. On April the 8th, a contemporary film from 2019 called The Vast of Night by Andrew Patterson, a documentary, a many-parted documentary by Adam Curtis that came out this year called 2021, called Can't Get You Out of My Head, and the big Oscar winner from 2019, Parasite by Bong Joon-ho. And on the book club, I'm talking about a new book, or recent book, by Joel Kotkin on March 26th, called The Coming of Neo-Feudalism. On April 2nd, once again for Holy Week, Evelyn Waugh's biography of Monsignor Ronald Knox. And on April the 9th, P.D. James's outstanding novel of the future, The Children of Men. And next week on Music Money, I'm going to be talking about the rise and fall of the producer. Producer became kind of a godlike figure in popular music, from the time of George Martin. But as I've said now, when you have 30, often have as many as 20, 25, 30 or more different producers on one collection of 8 or 10 tracks, it's clear that producers have become a dime a dozen. I will be back on the air tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you like the show or any part of it, I would appreciate it if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. I want to thank you so much once more for your outpouring of generosity to my plea for donations. On Friday, again, donations can be made to through PayPal at Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations can be made directly via Interac to kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this: in these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish you, my dear viewers and listeners, that you form a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.